Dead Space was a franchise that was only around for 5 years, but its legacy still lives on 8 years after the last installment. There hasn't been a game since Dead Space that captures that feeling and atmosphere that the series was able to achieve. It blended a horror setting with tense and balls-to-the-wall combat encounters. I'm a big fan of sci-fi games and killing aliens, so I think it's safe to say that me and Dead Space were made for each other. Let's get straight into this. The beginning of Dead Space can be seen with Resident Evil 4. While I have never played RE4 myself, I did watch the two best friends play it, so I'm basically an expert. But in any case, you don't have to take my word for it. Visceral, the Dead Space developers, have admitted so much themselves multiple times. If you need further proof, some of the devs for Dead Space have RE4 as one of their favorite games. RE4 was used as the building blocks for Dead Space rather than copying it completely. For starters, you can move around freely while aiming in Dead Space, but in RE4, if you aim, you're stuck where you're standing. I'm not going to delve too much into the differences since, like I said, I haven't played RE4, so I just be talking out of my ass. Just know that without RE4, Dead Space as we know it wouldn't exist. I think Dead Space holds up pretty well. That is 100% thanks to the lighting and models. This game is best played with the brightness adjusted to how the game intended it to look. It can get dark at times with only your flashlight guiding you. However, when it does get really dark, the lights come on shortly later, so it's never able to fully take advantage of the flashlight. Textures, however, yeah, this is a 7th gen game. For some reason, whenever Isaac goes into areas of no oxygen, all the light is sucked out into the vacuum of space as well. The biggest thing holding back 7th gen games was the limited amount of VRAM those consoles had back then. Games like Halo 4 look amazing from a distance, but up close and yeah, those textures don't hold up very well. A lot of this can be fixed if an HD texture pack ever comes out for the game. If you play on PC though, this game is kind of a nightmare. If you aren't the type of person that likes to download files to make the mouse feel good and go to the video control panel, then you might just want to plug in a controller and go from there. It's not as bad as other ports like Dark Souls, but it's definitely up there. If you don't limit the FPS to 60, then weird things can happen. This door at the beginning might be glitched and never open, or bodies will fly through the air spinning. The Ishimura can be a really weird place at times. I got the game working fine with a mouse and 60 FPS, but it definitely takes some tweaking. If you're wondering where you can find stuff like this, if you go in the PC Gaming Wiki, there's like a whole section for it. The game starts with our series hero, Isaac Clarke, setting out with a rescue team to respond to an SOS set by the USG Ishimura. It's kind of cute seeing Isaac before his mind starts going insane for the rest of the series. Making it a lot more personal for him, his girlfriend, Nicole, is stationed aboard that ship. It's been said before, but Isaac feels like your blue-collared worker. He's a simple engineer. His armor looks pretty unexciting at first, and more practical if anything. He looks like the type of person that would be killed off while he plays a soldier out there with the guns and training.
Bro, this is bullshit.
This feels like the kind of mission he volunteered for so he could see his girlfriend. At this point, Isaac most likely hadn't seen her for almost half a year, according to future events. Isaac is the perfect shell for a player to have control over. Just like any new player playing Dead Space, he has no idea how to use the weapons that he finds until he's forced to learn them from repetition. Isaac also doesn't talk in this game, and replaying this after its sequels, yeah, it's a little jarring at first. I don't think Isaac works well as a silent protagonist. There's just way too much going on for him to be quiet the whole time. While walking around in the intro, it's easy to notice one of my favorite features of Dead Space, the Zero HUD. The health on Isaac's bag, stasis meter, ammo counter, inventory, all these things are physically there in the world. Aiming can be hard at times because there's no simple HUD icon to look at. Rather, the player needs to line up the lasers of the weapon onto the target. Immersive stuff like this is what helps the Dead Space world feel even more real. The introduction is pretty short, and it's not long until people are being sliced and diced by necromorphs. Now, I played this game and the rest of the games on their hardest settings, because survival horror games like this are best played when health and ammo aren't plentiful. The first game isn't that hard, and I only died once my whole time playing. As long as you're careful and keep a good 6 feet from the necromorphs, anything is possible. If I had any gripes with the first Dead Space, it's that the enemies are too bullet spongy, I feel. It takes a total of 3 leg shots and 2 to 3 arm shots to take down the normal necromorph with a basic plasma cutter. The gameplay for Dead Space is good, but definitely a little clunky in places. For some reason, you have to go into your inventory to refill stasis, unlike the medkits which have a hotkey. I'd say that the clunky feeling helps to make combat more intense, because Isaac doesn't move exactly how you want him to. He's not a stomping machine like how he ends up later. Enemies tend to swarm Isaac from all directions, and it can be overwhelming at times. Luckily, you start with the most jack-of-all-trade weapons. The plasma cutter could be your only weapon, and you could do just fine with it. Even though the plasma cutter is a god tier weapon, all the weapons here have their place, except the flamethrower. If you're trying to live out your thing fantasies, then this is not the place for it. I think it's funny how the game goes against common trends like using guns, but once you find the pulse rifle, it's one of the best weapons in the game. A fully upgraded pulse rifle is a sight to see. Along with his weapons, Isaac also has a few other bonuses. He has basically the Force and can lift up objects and throw them at enemies. But most importantly, he has the stasis module. This thing saves lives. Shoot a thing of stasis at some enemies and they slow down, allowing Isaac time to run away. Inventory management is a must, especially early on. At the start of the game, Isaac's suit can only hold 10 items, so decisions need to be made on what is most important. Take the extra meds, ammo, stasis? I'm kidding about the stasis. Stasis modules are next to pointless, because there are refill stations all over the place. But it's a serious toss-up with the ammo and health. If things get a little too hectic, an extra med pack can save the player from a game over. But there will be a lot of times where Isaac is frantically swapping weapons because it ran out of ammo. And you'll need all that ammo and medkits you find too, because the ship Isaac is on is infested with anyone's worst nightmare. The necromorphs are straight up horrifying. Possibly the scariest zombies ever. You may not see too many of their features because you're too busy shooting their limbs off, but get a good look and it becomes clear just how messed up they are. Their arms are permanently lifted up by their elbows, with a sharp bone piercing through its victim's hands. Its abdomen has exploded open, revealing stubby arms to grab onto prey with. They slowly walk towards you with only the primal instinct to kill you guiding them. It's next to impossible to actually kill a necromorph, which is why going for the limbs is a strategy for killing them. They don't actually die when you shoot their limbs, they just go into a sort of hibernation mode. There's a lot wrong with just the basic necromorph, and it just keeps getting more bizarre as new types are discovered. The lurker are babies that have tentacles on their back that shoot sharp projectiles. The infector infects dead bodies into stronger black necromorphs. The pregnant necromorphs birth pieces of flesh with teeth that pounce onto the player. The exploder is a suicide bomber. The leaper? F this thing. Forget what I said about this not being the place for your thing fantasy. It's time to torch the ship. Speaking of the ship, the Ishimura is a great vessel to explore around in. It feels like a real place that people once used every day. I don't know if the ship was ever a safe place though. The fact that the gravity could be so messed up in certain spots that it could toss someone up into the ceiling is worrying. And if you didn't get that Visceral really liked RE4, the ship is littered with Japanese. The tight corridors and many optional pathways allow the player to find secrets that add to the slight Metrovania feeling. Even if Isaac gets lost, he's a very useful waypoint guide to know where he needs to go. I think the waypoint system was a great idea, because it lets the player know where the objective is and where all the optional stuff is. This game had a map, which is something that I keep forgetting. I don't know why the future games got rid of it. It was a useful tool to show where the shops were, in areas that hadn't been explored yet. I think if Dead Space ever comes back, going full on with a Metroidvania map would bring back a lot of what the first Dead Space tried to do. While I love the creepy vibe that the Necromorphs and Ishimura provide, I've never seen this series as the games that you play the shit your pants to. Dead Space isn't exactly what I would call subtle. There's almost no build up in the intro. The game wants Isaac to be slaying necromorphs by the 10-minute mark. Dead Space loves to have necromorphs lay down on the ground, pretending that they're dead. This will surprise you the first time, startle you the second, and by the third time, there is no third time. Horror is subjective, and if this game scares the bejeebus out of you, that's fine. Like for me, I can never play fear. Ghosts just appearing out of nowhere is a hard nope. I'm sure this has been talked about to death, and that you already know. Well, I hope so. I put a spoiler warning in the beginning. But yeah, Nicole is dead. She's been dead before Isaac even got to the ship. And hell, it's probably one of the necromorphs Isaac shot to pieces. A member of Isaac's crew was sent to retrieve a marker that the crew of the Ishimura had discovered that caused this whole outbreak. But that's not what the necromorphs want, so they use Isaac's dead girlfriend to convince him to return the marker down to the planet, which brings out this giant monster. The monster utterly obliterates this chick, and Isaac dispatches the monster with a few good shots. I talked a big game about this game not scaring me, but goddamn, that final scene gets me every time. For the developers and the new fans of Visceral's new IP, Dead Space was a huge success. It received praise from critics and won multiple awards. However, for EA, it wasn't exactly a money-making machine. In its first month, it sold a little over 190,000 copies, and sold only 1 million after 4 months. Horror games have a bad track record of not meeting publisher expectations. Even one of the biggest horror game franchises out there, Resident Evil, wasn't able to meet Capcom's sale expectations with RE7. EA was disappointed with the numbers, but they saw potential in the series and greenlit a sequel. They gave Visceral a larger budget to work with and probably gave them a small recommendation to have more action set pieces than before. EA knew that action games were much more profitable and tried to get into that audience. Visceral even added a multiplayer mode that I remember having a lot of fun with, but sadly nobody plays it anymore. It's been reported that Dead Space 2's budget was $60 million, and much of that was spent on the marketing. Dead Space's trailers look like this.
When the blazing sun is gone, when the nothing shines upon.
Dead Space's 2's trailers look like this.
Oh my god! Oh gosh. I think it'll make a person become insane.
This game is an atrocity.
It's revolting. It's violent. It's everything you love in a game. And your mom's gonna hate it.
Why would they even make something like this?
Dead Space 2's marketing is fairly well known because of the "your mom's gonna hate it" line of trailers. The trailer states that this is mom number 113, but in reality, it's probably mom number 3 trying to get some money on the side. Not only that, but there was an animated movie and a mobile phone game that launched the same day as Dead Space 2. I have fond memories of the mobile game. It has more creative uses of psychological horror than any of the mainline Dead Space games, if you can believe it. It's no longer playable on iOS or Android through official means, but Android users can download the APK to still play. Be wary though that most of them are modded in some way. The one that I found had infinite ammo for all the guns. Would I say that the marketing was worth it at the end though? As someone who got into the Dead Space series because these ads were everywhere, I'd say yes, but for EA, the game underperformed for them pretty hard. So how is the game? Well, for starters, it runs much better on PC than Dead Space 1. You could totally get away without altering anything outside the game, but the experience isn't perfect. With an uncapped frame rate, there are some weird things that happen with the physics that don't happen when locked to 60 FPS. Bodies have spasms when crushed by doors, and this chick's hair thingies look a lot dumber. These weren't big deals for me until some bigger bugs started to happen. In the sequence when Isaac is getting chased by a giant necromorph, the game glitched out for me and I couldn't reload the save. This made me realize that I should probably cap the game at 60. Your mileage may vary, but I'd recommend doing the same thing that I did for Dead Space 1, which is lock the frame rate and install a mouse fix. Coming off the first game, it's been 3 years, and our old boy Isaac isn't doing so well. His mind basically became fried after the events of the first game, and spent the next few years on an asylum on Jupiter's moon Titan, in a city hub known as the Sprawl. The government is using Isaac's mind to help them build a giant marker, and is only freed by this once an outbreak is caused by said marker. What's noticeable very fast about Isaac here is that he's no longer a silent protagonist. Glad he finally got the confidence to say literally anything. And if for some reason you thought this game might be more subtle than the first game, yeah, this game is insane. All the clunkiness from the first game's movement and combat are gone here, and this leads to much more fluid gameplay that allows the combat to be faster than before. Necromorphs hit a lot harder in this game, and I felt the need to upgrade my health. Whereas in the first game, I could have been totally fine with the base health. The big tank-like necromorphs one-hit Isaac if they get a good hit on him with the base health. Enemies are easier to kill here, which gives the weapons a sharper feeling, but their increase in aggression helps for making the game easier. Visceral didn't make all the normal necromorphs super aggressive, but instead made new forms to fill in those roles. It's hard to think about a Dead Space game without the Puker, the Babies, and the Stalker. They all give such variety to the sandbox. The Puker spits vomit at you that either does a little or no damage, honestly I couldn't tell, but slows down the player significantly. The Babies are a pedophobian's worst nightmare.
Oh my god! You f***ing kids! I've got places to be!
But it'd be a disservice if I didn't talk about the Stalkers, and oh how I love the Stalkers. These necromorphs will hunt you like a pack of wolves. You know when you're entering their lair by their scampering and distinctive sounds. They'll grab your attention with a distraction while another one begins charging at you. With the increased number of enemies, you probably killed twice as many necromorphs than the last game. Isaac most likely killed half the population of necromorphs on this space station by himself. They even added in an option to use a crosshair to aim with to make the shooting easier. This one setting I feel like caused a lot of angry forum posts. You can do what you want, but the crosshair just feels wrong. Inventory has also become a lot easier to manage, with 15 free slots being available right off the bat, and stasis modules being stackable. But those things are still pretty cringe, so we toss those babies. Depending on how you see this, it can be a good or a bad thing. The tediousness with low inventory space is gone, but there's no reason to worry about health or ammo since Isaac can carry plenty now. The store's UI has also seen a much needed overhaul. However, the first time you go into the store, you'll probably be wondering why you have dozens of free weapons and armor. Well, that's thanks to EA bundling all the DLC into the only version purchasable on Steam and Origin. I mean, it's cool and all that EA has all the downloadable extras included for free, but for once, I really wish that they had charged for it because playing with these weapons and armor will not only ruin the experience for new players that use them, but clutter up the store page if you don't. So if you want to play Dead Space 2 the way it's meant to be played, and also want a clean store screen, you'll need to buy everything one at a time and stick it into the storage, never to be seen again. Thankfully, Dead Space 3 doesn't have this mess. It just has other problems. So what about the environment? Well, it's undeniably still Dead Space. The Sprawl is able to explore a much larger variety of locations because it's a bustling city center. There's hospitals, daycares, malls, mining tunnels, the Ishimura? It has everything. It never captures the same horror atmosphere that the Ishimura did, which is funny because the Ishimura itself in this game is used to such great effect. The Sprawl, nonetheless, is still a wonderfully horrifying place to explore. Isaac being a part of a necromorph outbreak rather than witnessing the remains is used pretty well here. Civilians are screaming and running and crying trying to get away. Isaac has the opportunity to save these people, but usually this ends up failing. This dude in the dryers always confused me, so maybe the people here deserve to die. The characters Isaac interact with here are a lot better than the first game. They have a lot more personality and life in them. You got Strauss, who, at least in the game, can be seen as what Isaac would have been if he wasn't able to fight off the marker from his mind. Strauss is harmless until the marker becomes too much for him and starts poking out eyeballs, which brings us to our next character, Ellie. Ellie is a notable character for being the first Dead Space character other than Isaac not to die. Definitely got a 13-year-old me to notice the game more. She's pretty much Isaac's equal in the game, being able to hold off necromorphs on her own and getting Strauss from place to place. Considering she doesn't have any armor on, she's clearly pretty badass. But her and Isaac would have been doomed without each other, and it shows that Isaac wasn't able to handle things on his own this time and would need a partner in the future. Their relationship blossomed after the events of Dead Space 2 and quickly pulled a Jurassic Park 3 and broke them up. Yeah, it's time to talk about Dead Space 3. The direction of the Dead Space series can be felt with their reveal trailers. Dead Space 1 has easily the best one with its rendition of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. Dead Space 2 has a very stylized trailer of necromorphs showing their gross and deformed bodies with rock in the background. And then there's the Dead Space 3 one.
Let's get one thing straight, Clark. We came to this frozen shithole to stop the markers, and nothing, not you or your obsession with Ellie, is gonna get in my way. You got that?
Dead Space 3's reveal trailer features a lot of shooting in it. It looks like an action game. It even refers to the Dead Space series as an epic. When I think of an epic, I think of a large-scale action game like the Mass Effect trilogy. A horror game series doesn't quite fit that bill. EA gets a lot of flack still today, but I'd argue that their worst was during the end of the 7th generation of consoles. Basically, from 2012 to the end of 2014 featured a bunch of mismanagement from EA that clearly showed in their games as they tried to push their well-loved franchises into as close to yearly releases as they could. Mass Effect 3, Battlefield 4, Medal of Honor Warfighter, SimCity, The Sims 4, and Dead Space 3 were all very controversial when they were released because they were either a buggy mess or strayed far from what the fans wanted from the series. Most of the games in this list don't have very good lives today, and I doubt we'll ever see them again in their true forms because EA fucked up that hard during this time period. Free-to-play phone games were on their rise during this time period as well, and Dead Space 3 was one of the first games to try to incorporate this kind of monetization into it. Pretty early on, Isaac unlocks these drones that gather supplies for him, that let him upgrade his gear. Think of it like sending a group of miners to gather resources for you on a phone game that takes an hour of real life time. You set the drone down and then about 10 minutes later, you get the resources. And also, like a mobile game, you also get these little guys as time goes on to gather more resources for very expensive upgrades later on. Unfortunately, like a mobile game, you can also spend real money to make the drones gather resources even faster. The thing with the system it has in place, as long as you do the side areas and explore, Isaac can be pretty heavily upgraded by the end of the game simply by selling rare items. I have a feeling that EA knew that if they made it too hard to get resources, it'd just piss off the fan base more than it needed to. Things like the drone upgrades make me think that EA was more targeting the casual gamer who only follow the waypoints and don't explore. If you're going to be playing on the hardest difficulty, you'll need all those resources. Let's talk about the combat because it's one of the biggest changes from the two previous games. Isaac isn't taking shit from the Necromorphs anymore. Dead Space 2 felt like a more action-packed Dead Space 1, but the third game doesn't have the same flow as the first two games, and that's not because there are human enemies now. The Plasma Cutter ended up being a pretty big disappointment compared to the other two versions. The Necromorphs now don't get stunned nearly as easy anymore from attacks, and they always run to the player. This means that slower firing weapons will get you overrun a lot because even if you shoot off their legs, there's a very likely chance that they'll mutate and still move fast. Because of this, weapons with a high fire rate are needed to quell the crowds. And these ain't no low damaging pulse rifles. Yes, the pulse rifle in the earlier games could be an absolute beast against normal necromorphs, but once the black version started showing up, it was way better to switch to the plasma cutter to deal more damage and to save ammo. Most of the machine guns in Dead Space 3 start out at low damage, but what kills the balancing is the circuit board. You can add 4 circuits to each weapon that increases things like damage, reload speed, and fire rate. A fully upgraded rifle in this game deals utterly ridiculous damage at a high fire rate. Frames can also be added to a weapon that add their own upgrades to damage as well. With all these factors, and all ammo now being universal, if you run out of ammo in this game, you're doing something wrong. Since Isaac can now only carry 2 weapons, it's really important to have one gun that can do anything. You can also add an attachment to your weapons. Now, on that already powerful rifle, a shotgun, flamethrower, grenade launcher, or a rocket launcher can be installed with its own circuits to upgrade. Isaac's main weapon was so powerful in my playthrough, I felt like I had to force myself to even use my second weapon. If this Isaac was in Dead Space 2, he'd be the Doomslayer. Visceral knew that the player was stupidly OP and that the only way they could counter it was by adding what feels at times limitless waves of necromorphs. I have been stuck in a room for 3 to 5 minutes, camping in a corner, waiting for the next door to open. It's insane. Not only that, but the enemies are back to feeling bullet spongy like how they did in Dead Space 1, and combine that with it being harder to stun them leads to a lot of frustrating moments. The stasis module is also kinda pointless because it barely slows down the necromorphs, and they still perfectly track you while in stasis. And not only do they run at you, but when they get close enough, they do this goddamn Grievous attack where they get down on all fours and charge the player, making leg shots worthless. These fucking kids inside Jabu Jabu's belly took me an hour to defeat. Some people complain that Isaac bitches a lot, but honestly, after what he's gone through, I'd probably bitch too. Oh, but we ain't done with the bitching just yet. This game has easily one of the worst save systems I've ever had to experience. Gone are the days of setting up predefined spots like in the previous Dead Space games that made it super obvious that the game was good, it was saved, and you could quit now and you start from where you last ended. Dead Space 3 takes this system and throws it out the airlock. I've seen the spinning circle indicating that my game was saved. I have seen it, and then I quit, only for me to load the game back up and lose 30 minutes of progress because I didn't get to the save point. What's more annoying than trying to get past a room for half an hour? Having to repeat that same room because the game didn't save properly. You know what could have fixed this whole problem? A goddamn save button. there's a save and quit button, and that's worse because saving and quitting doesn't work. Alright, I'm done bitching about the gameplay. Let's talk about the co-op. EA also did one of the worst things any survival horror game can do, and that's add co-op. I don't care how scary the game is, if you're bullshitting with a friend, the scares are 50% less effective. Now, Visceral had some great ideas for co-op that involves the player seeing different things because of the hallucinations that would add to the narrative of these characters being affected by the marker. Not only that, but the other player would have been Shadow Isaac, which would have been a big twist to have the second player be an illusion. There's a tiny bit of that in the actual game, but EA didn't want to actually scare players in a series that tries to scare people. It's not just co-op's fault that the horror is gone, it's just not in the game itself. Listen to the action music in the previous 2 games. And now listen to the action music in Dead Space 3. Co-op was a mistake in the end because the character Carver adds nothing to the story. He's your generic military tough dude with a scar. Why not have the second character be Ellie? Instead, she gets a major downgrade. I'm not one to complain about stuff like this, but coming off of her character in Dead Space 2, she's basically there just to be the hot girl and not much else. Instead of fighting and killing stuff, Ellie's there in this love triangle that is so weird for so many reasons. The story in this game is so bad. It's bad because of how non-Dead Space most of it is. It tries to be an action movie. Isaac's cast of characters around him in the past games were pretty small. About 2 to 3 characters were active in the story at any given point. But Dead Space 3 has so many cannon fodder characters. The good guy crew is full of what might as well be nameless nobodies, because other than the guy that looks like he tells women that they should smile more often, they're basically just husks in a shell. A part that is unintentionally hilarious is when the crew crash lands on the planet and Isaac is separated from Ellie. He finds the ship and sees a body in the snow. He digs it up and reveals a dude with half of his head missing, and without blinking an eye, Isaac says, later, Isaac is like, nobody else is gonna die, and then about 10 minutes later, the last cannon fodder dies. Like, this game is a dark comedy, and you can't tell me otherwise. People will die and then just ragdoll. But you know what? The environments in this game are still unmistakably Dead Space. The space section is my favorite part of the game because it's oddly really open-ended. Isaac can explore a lot of different areas, including optional ones. Dead Space 3 is oddly the most Metroidvania of the Dead Space games. The snow planet is a nice change of pace too. Fighting on a planet brings a lot more unique encounters now since necromorphs can hide in the ground and just have a much larger area to roam in general. Through and through, Visceral never slouched when it came to the environments Isaac explores in. And not everything with the gameplay changes was bad either. In the past, Isaac collected nodes to upgrade his suit and weapons with. In between the upgrade nodes was a blank upgrade Isaac had to spend his node on to get closer to the upgrade he actually wanted. It felt like a waste of a node. Here though, Isaac is using his engineering background to build weapons and armor upgrades using spare parts he finds. There's a good game here, but it's just under all this gunk. I remember liking Dead Space 3 when I played it years ago, not understanding the hate. But after replaying the trilogy in order, it removed so much what made the first game so special. At least Dead Space 3 didn't end on a cliffhanger. Isaac destroys the markers once and for all. Well, it originally ended that way anyways. It's not bad enough that Dead Space is a dead series, but it also had the actual end of the game hidden in a DLC. Think if to watch the legendary ending to Halo 3, you had to pay Bungie $10 to see that the Master Chief was still alive to watch his empire fall. This is the current state of the Dead Space series. A cliffhanger that will never be resolved in any worthwhile way. I'm not under the belief that Dead Space won't ever come back. Not only have fans been actively asking EA to make a new game, but some of the original Dead Space developers are working on a spiritual successor. And also, VR horror games have become decently popular, and I could see EA making a smaller scaled horror game where you play in VR to gauge interest in the IP. Why I don't think it'll be resolved in a worthwhile way is because Visceral has been dead for a while now. After being forced to make a poorly received Battlefield game, Visceral had their doors closed in 2017. And with the talent spread all over the games industry now, I'm not sure that another studio could carry on the pure passion that Visceral once had for themselves for Dead Space, until that passion was used against them so EA could be worth a couple more % on the stock market. Visceral created a world that is to this day still worth talking about. Isaac Clarke, even through to the 3rd game, is a likable character who just wants this zombie shit to end. He's one of the most human characters that one can play because he himself is on edge and scared, but pushes on because he needs to, just like the player. I just want to see my man Isaac be able to sit down and rest for a minute, see his story come to an end, and live the good life that he deserves. Maybe one day.